If you're following along in the timeline, what we have right now is Jesus has finished the Seder meal with his disciples. We were in that room last night, the Seder room, and just following him going to Gethsemane and going to pray, and he was then betrayed by one of his own. And what we have recorded in all four of the Gospels is the crucifixion story. I'm going to read from the Gospel of John. The reason why we're reading from the Gospel of John tonight, we'll start in John 18, beginning in verse 28, is it is the longest of the crucifixion accounts. There are lots of differences between each of the four. For those of you that are new to the things of God and new to the things of Christianity, we have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All four of them are recording as Jesus is doing the work, and each of them record just a little bit of the nuances of the crucifixion. The reason why tonight is somber, it's dark. The reason why the songs are somber, even as a New Testament believer looking backwards, is because Friday is intended to memorialize the cross. And some would say, oh man, thank God for the cross. Yes, that's true. The cross is death, and Christ does beat death. But it's not seen by the disciples. And so if we are following the timeline, then we would be in this moment, because it's entering into the evening or the next day. This would have been a very, very scary moment. Remember, this evening would be Sabbath. This would be the day. So today would be the day of preparation. So everybody's quickly getting things together. And remember, all of the lambs would have been slaughtered today. Jesus was one of those lambs. And so this evening, the disciples would go. And they would have had a lamb prepared. They would have had a lamb prepared, terrified. And so as they enter into this time, I'm going to begin to read from John chapter 18, beginning in verse 28. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, so they could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to meet them. What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered him, remember, this is the religious leaders, the Pharisees. If this man had not done evil, we would not have delivered him over to you. Verse 31, Pilate said to them, take him for yourselves and judge him by your own law. And the Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show what kind of death he was going to die. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus to him. And he said, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, do you say this on your own accord, or do others say it about me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not from this world. And then Pilate said to him, so you're a king? Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, what is truth? After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in this man. But you have a custom that I shall release one man to you for Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? They cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a robber. Because of that, chapter 19 records at the very beginning, the first line of chapter 19 of the Gospel of John, then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. What does it mean to flog somebody? The flog was to to have lashes of a cat of nine tails. It was an instrument of torture, only about 3 feet long, and it was swung in opposition to another. Usually were flogged by 2 people. Why? Because one would swing as the other one wound up, and it was more efficient. You were able to have more lashes during that time. It's recorded in what is believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus, that there's at least on the front and back of the man of the shroud, that there were 372 individual places of wounds, and that is not to also add to that which was on the sides of the man of the shroud. And the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it upon his head and arrayed him in a purple robe. This also is really important that we know that it wasn't a crown of thorns like you would see like a wreath around a man's head. In fact, this crown of thorns that we have in front of us is actually not a typical first century crown of thorns. It was a helmet of thorns. It was a helmet of thorns. And it covered the entirety of his head, we know, based upon not just this crucified man of the shroud, but also others that had been crucified. We knew very carefully that that is be the case. And you might say, well, yes, but what about all the paintings? It's Europe. That's what Europe gave us. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it upon his head and arrayed him with a purple robe. They came to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They struck him with their hands. And Pilate went out again and said to him, "See, I'm bringing him out so that you may find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and a purple robe. And Pilate said to him, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to him, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no guilt in him." And the Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die because he has made himself the Son of God." Again, anyone who claims that Jesus was just a good moral teacher or that Jesus wasn't actually saying that he was God, everybody knew what Jesus was saying. The religious leaders knew what Jesus was saying. To the point of his death, everybody knew that Jesus claimed divinity. When Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered his headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "Will you not speak to me? Do you not know that I have the authority to release you and the authority to crucify you?" And Jesus answered him, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." From then on, Pilate sought to release him. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Anyone who makes himself a king is opposed to Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out, set him down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, in Aramaic called Gabbatha. And now it was the day of preparation of Passover. It was about the 6th hour. Now the Gospel of Matthew says that darkness happened at the 9th hour. The Gospel of Mark said that it was the 3rd hour and that he cried out on the 9th hour. And the Gospel of Luke said it was between the 6th and the 9th hour. Notice the similarity yet small discrepancies. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." They cried out, away with him, crucify him." And Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests, the religious leaders of the day, they cried out, "We have no king but Caesar." So he delivered him over to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record that he did not go to the entirety of that distance with the trivium, with the crossbeam of the cross that Simon of Cyrene carried partly a part of the way, the cross. John records that he carried it to a place called the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him with two others, one on each side, and Jesus between them. The Gospel of Mark accounts that, the Gospel of Matthew accounts that they were arguing with each other, the two thieves, that they were just spewing insults across Jesus back one to another. The Gospel of Mark records that only one of them did. The Gospel of Luke records that only one of them taunted Jesus. We don't see that here in the narrative of John. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it upon the cross. This was Pilate that did this. He would have been the only one with the authority to be able to do this. And it read, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The Gospel of Matthew says, this is. The Gospel of Mark says, this is the King of the Jews. The Gospel of Luke says, this is. The Gospel of John that we're reading says, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read the inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city. And it was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, do not write that. Do not write King of the Jews, but rather write that the man said that I am like the King of the Jews. And Pilate answered him, what I have written, I have written. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, one part for each shoulder, also his tunic. But his tunic was seamless, woven into one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, let us tear it, but cast lots to see whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scriptures, saying that they divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. The soldiers did these things, but standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister. The Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record that the women observed the cross from afar. Church history records that the reason why the Gospel of John very likely recorded it this way is because John the Beloved was there with the women, and the other disciples likely were observing the cross from afar out of fear. And in their written accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record that Jesus and the women who were witnessing the crucifixion did so from afar. Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, for those of you that are not into this is John referring to himself, the disciple that Jesus loved. He said to his mother, woman, a term of endearment, behold your son. Then he said to his disciple, behold your mother. Very likely because all of his remaining brothers were not believers. Very important for us to see this. Very, very important to see this. If we were to do a genogram of Jesus, he has 3 additional brothers, at least 2 unnamed sisters. They would not have named them. And at this point, the second oldest brother would have been James. At this point, James was not a Christian. We know that because James was in no documents of any kind in the Gospels. He was an antagonist. We saw in Matthew chapter 13, just a few weeks ago, that James was an antagonist to Jesus. When the chief priests were saying, his own family doesn't believe, and his sisters are with us. And here, John the Beloved is to take care of